Don't miss Good American Family.
We have a little girl here for adoption. She has dwarfism.
Starring Ellen Pompeo and Mark Duplass.
Something is off.
She's just a little girl. You think she's faking?
She has adult teeth. There are signs of puberty.
Inspired by the shocking stories that tore a family apart.
I don't know what's going on.
How old are you?
You should get a lawyer.
You have no idea how those people hurt this girl.
The Hulu original series, Good American Family, premieres March 19th, streaming on Hulu.
If you're constantly waking up feeling like you didn't get a full night's rest, the problem might actually be your mattress. For a better sleep, Sleep Number Smart Bed has your back. Since 2018, Sleep Number and the NFL have partnered to bring quality sleep to elite athletes. Now 80% of NFL players have a Sleep Number Smart Bed, and there's a good reason for that. Sleep plays a huge role in boosting recovery and performance after workouts. Both sides of a Sleep Number Smart Bed uniquely contour to your head, neck, and shoulders for a more personalized and comfortable rest. You can even adjust the bed's firmness, perfect for couples with different sleep needs. Why choose a Sleep Number Smart Bed? So you can choose your ideal comfort on either side. And now, save 40% on the new Sleep Number Special Edition Smart Bed. Limited time, exclusively at a Sleep Number store near you. See store or sleepnumber.com for details.
I was struggling for the past year and a half, 2 years with trying to lose weight.
I just can't get rid of the stubborn weight in my legs and in my belly.
While everyone is unique and will have varied results, here are extraordinary experiences from independent body affiliates and actual Belvital users.
There's nothing more frustrating than knowing that you're eating well, but it's not working.
Hormone imbalances were preventing these women from losing weight. Now there's a comprehensive plan to help.
With Belvital, I just noticed changes immediately. That stubborn scale finally moved.
In this first week, I lost 5 pounds.
Just after 1 week, I'm down 6 pounds and all of my bloating is gone.
I just finished the Belvital program. I have lost 15 pounds and I have never felt better.
I've noticed inches just shed every week that I go through.
I feel like an entirely different person.
I don't know if I've ever felt this good.
Get hormone health for women at belvital.com. And while supplies last, save 15% with promo code BV15.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to be at this place at this time, and then them go there. Like, it's even like I've said this to Julia, like, we focus a lot on the front half of the plane theory, but like, I think the back half is even more intriguing to me because it just doesn't make sense. Like, if he were to have killed Scott at 8:55 a.m., which is when most of the students, when they're walking to their 9 a.m. class, if he were to have killed him then, drove away right then, I've been there, you can't find a field for 20 minutes, right? So let's call it 9:15, you get to a field. And then you got to get out of your car, you got to walk to the plane, you got to do these things. It's 298 miles, I believe, from, Port Huron, again, like with variances based on, flying straight, right? And at that time, I believe the fastest plane was 177 miles an hour. So yeah, you got a couple miles, or you can get there probably in a couple hours, right? But then you have to land, you have to get back into a car, you have to drive, and he's alibied again by a number of witnesses at 11:30.
That's Jason Usry, the host of Inconceivable, the Temujin Kensu Story, which is about the 1986 murder in Michigan, the man who was convicted of it, and questions about whether the right decision was made. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. Temujin Kensu is a Michigan man who's been serving a life sentence without parole for the 1986 murder of 20-year-old college student Scott Macklem. The murder happened in a campus parking lot at St. Clair Community College in Port Huron, Michigan. The murder was as brazen as it was brutal. No one saw the shooting, but what emerged was that soon after exiting his car in the parking lot, Macklem was felled by a single shotgun round. The police found a shotgun shell and an ammunition box near the scene. But the murder weapon has never been found. Scott was the son of the mayor of a nearby Michigan town, a tiny town almost 30 miles north of Port Huron, which is, as the name suggests, a port town on the southern tip of Lake Huron and is much closer to Toronto than any major American city. Scott's girlfriend, Crystal Merrill, quickly pointed the police toward Kensu, who was her ex-boyfriend and a man she would later say raped her. Crystal said that Temujin, who was also known at the time as Fred Freeman, had threatened to kill her and Scott if they didn't stop dating. Court records suggest that the police quickly honed in on Temujin. It seemed like a logical move, but Temujin had an alibi, including more than a dozen people, 9 of whom were called at trial, who said they saw Temujin around 3 a.m. or before on the day of the 8:55 a.m. shooting, more than 430 miles from the college, and on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, across the entirety of Lake Huron and beyond in the part of the state that's connected to Wisconsin. To give you a comparison, the town Temujin was seen in was more than 6 hours away from where the shooting happened and is closer to Green Bay, Wisconsin, Duluth, Minnesota, Rochester, Minnesota, and Minneapolis, St. Paul. To get around this, prosecutors argued that a nearly destitute Temujin got access to a plane and pilot and flew to Port Huron. The prosecutors also put on a fellow inmate who said Temujin confessed. After trial, that man recanted. At trial, Merrill said that Temujin had tried to intimidate and dominate her through sex, beatings, and the continued threat of death. The jury wrestled with their verdict for days, and it took 5 votes. According to the Port Huron Times-Herald, the jury was first deadlocked at 6-6. Then they voted 7-5 for guilt, then 8-4, then 10-2, and then 12-0. There was a lot of emotion in that jury room. There were tears and voices raised, one juror told the paper. But we finally agreed he did it. Another juror told the newspaper his alibi was too perfect. He called too many people. And if he was so innocent, why didn't he testify himself and tell us that he didn't do it? It's a telling moment, especially since jurors are not supposed to consider whether a defendant takes the stand as a sign of guilt. The sentiment about the alibi was echoed by Macklem's friends. One family friend said the prosecutors, quote, certainly convinced me beyond a reasonable doubt that Freeman killed Scott. His alibi was too airtight. But added afterwards that there was more than testimony that convicted Temujin. He said his arrogance and his cockiness did it too. The jurors saw right through it. When Temujin was handcuffed and led from the courtroom by 8 officers who formed a circle around him, he said, "They got the wrong man. I'll beat this on appeal. Just wait." Temujin is still waiting. But like the title of Jason's podcast, I find it inconceivable that Temujin Kensu committed the crime for which he is charged. From this conversation, I think we get some answers to why he's not been released, which are connected to other things I find inconceivable. I also find it inconceivable that some portrayals of him often exclude references to a long string of sexual assaults he's been accused of, and those women have had no real voice. I find it inconceivable that the people who have the power to show him mercy are not aware of those allegations. I also find it inconceivable that Temujin Kensu will be released if he does not apologize for some of those behaviors that Jason says he has acknowledged. Today we're going to discuss Temujin's case, how Jason became involved in it, what he thinks it says about the justice system, why he thinks efforts to get Temujin's release have been unsuccessful, and what he hopes will come from his effort to investigate and bring awareness to the case. Jason. Thank you for joining me. I could rattle on about the 19 times you've already been on the podcast. But I don't know. It's been like, what, 2 years that we've known each other now?
It's been a little bit of time. No, I appreciate you having me back on. Like this is as you know, this is an important thing to me, and I'm stoked to be here with you.
Yeah. And I think, it's very interesting to see your overall arc in this space. Just as somebody who comes from the journalism side, and I could never, ever imagine doing what you do as a sort of storyteller and writer on something like Santa May Be a Criminal. But it's really been nice to watch you go through this journey to get into our crazy space, which I will tell you is much less of an art than what you do. It's just a craft, and you just have to learn the craft. So welcome to the Journalism Club.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Like, I never walked into this thinking I would be a journalist, but, like when you start to investigate things, it sort of becomes a nature. Like I know you guys understand that when you're looking into things, like you find your path, and I've found a path. I don't know if it's the path, but I found a path, and it's been really exciting to do that. But there is so much work to be done, so I'm really excited to continue to work on that.
I think that you'll find that the toughest thing about doing investigative journalism, at least in my opinion, other people may be different, is there is no end to investigating another person's life or an event. So when to stop was always the toughest thing for me. That or when to put everybody on the investigative team in the psych hospital. That was
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. My gosh, like I tell people, people always say this is like going into a rabbit hole, and it's more like a whirlpool where like you think you're in a spot and you get whipped around, and it is very it's neck breaking, and the amount of information you get when you're doing this for the first time. And yeah, I mean the whole focus of the show is to get to the truth.
Yeah. And I think the important part is, like, I always found that, like, when you're trying to make a tough decision in journalism, you just like grab onto that North Star and say, which direction leads me closer to truth? Christians will often talk about like this idea of like, well, what decision would bring me closer to God? And I think there's a very similar thing in journalism. What will bring me closer to truth? Which actually is a good transition to what I wanted to ask you about first. You're not a journalist by trade. And you've kind of alluded to the idea that it's kind of scary to even think of yourself as a journalist. I completely get it, because you've been surrounded by them in your career.
Yeah.
So, that probably even makes it scarier than people who don't know or don't have any information.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you, what was it about Temujin's case that was so compelling for you that inspired you to go out on this limb and take this kind of risk to explore it and investigate it this way?
Yeah, I want to like mention that I have my background is in broadcast, in the broadcast media on the creative side. So I've worked with a lot of journalists. I've worked with people like you, Jason. And I have a lot of respect for what you guys do. And it was very, very difficult for me to step into those shoes, because I know how much work you all do. My life has been creating things out of what you do. You guys give me the content, and then I create the things. With Temujin's case, I looked at this case for almost 4 years. I think in March it'll be 4 years. It was 3 years, almost 4, before I felt like it was something that I could even really really take into account as something that I wanted to do as a serious podcast. So I had, again, I'm a creative guy, so I had Santa Maybe a Criminal, and that's still gonna happen. That's a little bit on the back burner at the moment. But Santa Maybe a Criminal was birthed out of the pandemic, and it was me doing a creative thing with friends of mine in the true crime podcasting community, which I have been an editor in and consultant, for a few years. But with Temujin's case, I heard it first on the Prosecutors podcast, and I was like, well, that's weird. And so I looked further into the case and really didn't think a whole lot of it until Paula Kensu, Temujin's wife, reached out to me about Santa Maybe a Criminal. And she said she was talking about it to him and he wanted to hear it. Of course he couldn't in the prison. And she asked me to send a script to him, and I did. I got a very kind note back from him. And if anybody wants to write him, he's in the MDOC, Michigan Department of Corrections, number 189355. Thanking me for it, and a really, really nice note. And I didn't think anything of that either. It was nice. It was a nice note, but I wasn't there. And it took me a little longer to get to the point where it's like, I just kept looking at the case. Like, I'm not a wrongful conviction guy. I'm not, as Jason, as I work for the Prosecutors podcast. They don't do a ton of those cases. I worked previously on a pro law enforcement podcast. But like you said in the beginning, my North Star is the truth. And I do think that most people that are in prison earn their way there. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that there are some, this is a human element here. Like, there are people there that don't belong there. And it took me a little bit of time to get to that point with Temujin. And after having looked at it for a long time, I was like, gosh, I actually want to do something about this. And, who knows if what I do is going to be enough, but it was enough for me to spur me into action. And I'm grateful for those of you that supported me in that effort.
Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
There's one thing that will forever change the way you sleep, and it's the softest 100% organic cotton sheets from Boll & Branch. You'll fall asleep faster, wrapped in the most luxurious comfort. You'll never sleep hot again. With sheets that feel breathable to sleep in, you'll experience the purest softness on night one and feel your sheets get even softer with every wash. Discover the difference with 15% off your first set of sheets at bollandbranch.com with code WONDERY15. Exclusions apply. See site for details.
At the Hyundai Getaway Sales Event, get deals so right, it almost feels wrong. Now's the best time to get that Hyundai car or SUV you've always wanted. Plus, every new Hyundai comes with America's Best Warranty and 3 years or 36,000 miles of limited complimentary maintenance. Don't think you can get away with all that? Think again. But don't wait. The Hyundai Getaway Sales Event is going on now. So visit your local Hyundai dealer today. It's a great day for a new Hyundai.
Calling all dog owners. Your furry friend deserves top-notch nourishment, and Ollie delivers the clean, fresh nutrition your dog needs in 5 flavors they'll absolutely flip over. Ollie is made in U.S. kitchens with ingredients carefully sourced from trusted growers and producers around the world, with absolutely no harmful fillers or preservatives. With protein-first recipes like fresh beef with sweet potatoes, fresh turkey with blueberries, or fresh lamb with cranberries, you might start thinking, dang, my dog eats better than I do. And that's probably true when it comes to Ollie. Give your pup a fresh start this new year by letting them taste test a personalized meal plan with Ollie. Head to ollie.com/Wondery. Tell them all about your dog and use code WONDERY to get 60% off your first box of meals when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a clean bowl guarantee on the first box. So if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/Wondery and enter code WONDERY to get 60% off your first box. Start your dog's new year off right with Ollie. Start your dog's new year off right with Ollie.
What was it about it though for you that stuck out? Because there are, wrongful conviction cases out there that, you can be pretty confident that the person was wrongfully convicted. And I completely agree with your point that this notion, and I think like in the pro law enforcement, pro sort of like justice side of the house. I think most people are pro, but I think, right. If you come from the worldview of law enforcement mostly being good, prosecutors mostly being good, and like most people in prison belong in prison. I think if that's the background and experience that you have, and I look at this from a journalist, we as a journalist, we tend to cover, man bites dog as opposed to dog bites man. Spend a lot of time with like the innocence cases or the serial killers or the really crazy things, right? So we probably get a little bit more exposure to that. But if you're coming from that sort of law and order perspective, I think it can be really shocking for people when they do see a case where, because I think we can all believe our system is flawed and it makes mistakes. But I think of somebody like Curtis Flowers, right? Who never was convicted, was tried, I don't know what, like God knows how many times over 20, 30 years. It took the Supreme Court, it took Brett Kavanaugh basically saying, F and stop. You have situations like Temujin's, you have other cases like Leo Schofield's, and you see those cases like that. I remember when those stories in 2014 came out in the Tampa Bay Tribune, pretty sure based on that Leo Schofield innocent. I think it can be very shocking to see a case where almost everyone agrees that the person is innocent, but they're still behind bars. And I wonder whether that was some of the thing that motivated you, like the shock at like, how can our system not correct this thing that people kind of agree on, or a lot of people agree on?
Yeah, no, to address the earlier thing you mentioned, like, I think like, look, I've worked in the media for 20 years. I know how it works. You worked in it for 20 plus years or so, and you know how it works. And there are things.
Did I tell you, this is a total aside, but I was on a podcast last year, or was the year before? I don't know. And it was a old school journalist, and she was interviewing me actually about Trump and the upcoming Trump administration. And she asks, like, why did you decide to get back into journalism? I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't get back into journalism. And she's like, you sit around interviewing people every week. That's journalism. So I now count it 25 plus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because apparently I returned without realizing it.
Well, you did. I think you did. And I think what you do is important. And I think that, we look at these things, they are managed by people. So there are flaws there. And, the system is flawed, and for me getting into this, it was really looking at, I guess, like confronting my own bias on what I thought the criminal justice system was. And so my first podcast I ever worked on was a show that was called End of Watch with Bootsy and Sal. And that was with a former homicide detective and undercover ATF agent. And their careers ended in not great ways. And the system sort of screwed them over at the end of it. The system they swore to defend. Yeah. And our goal in that podcast was to unmask the stigma of the mental health. Yeah. In law enforcement, because it's so important when people are putting their lives online every single day, the stress that causes, etc. And so that's what our goal was. And, we did that for, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 episodes, something like that. And both of them moved on, but I had a great time doing that. And I thought it was like the message was important. But then, I got really interested in that time in the true crime space. And fortunately, I met Brett and Alice, and then I was already listening to their show, and I bribed Brett to hire me as an editor, and he's kept me on.
But there's some questions I won't even ask.
Yeah, but yeah, no, like that was really cool. But I'd listened to his case on that show, and then it always stuck in the back of my mind, and I came back to it and looked for more things, and then when Paula reached out to me a couple years ago and asked me for the script and those things, we moved forward with getting that to him. And then like weirdly, in August of last year, I come home, like, again, I've been in broadcasting for a long time, and I was coming home. I was from an event from the Georgia Association of Broadcasters, and I get this call from Michigan. I'm like, anybody in Michigan? I'm like, what's this? And I silenced it because I just thought it was like, whatever weird call.
Mm-hmm.
And Paula texted me and she said, "Hey, it's me and Temujin. We want to talk to you." I was like, "Oh, okay." So I got on a call with them, and she was on the phone with him from the prison, and we talked for a bit. And, I'd already kind of decided that I wanted to do this project, but it was really kind of cool to hear his voice for the first time to me. We've heard it a lot of times in other podcasts, but to me, because, I was sort of working in a vacuum there, for the first little bit of time when I was trying to like look at this case and not hear him know who I was. And that was really, that was really cool. But yeah, I mean, walking into this thing is like walking into any investigation is crazy.
I remember working when I was a reporter in New York and working with like a young reporter. And one of the most shocking things for her that was less shocking for me at the time, because, I started reporting when I was in high school, and so this was that, we like to think of the criminal justice system as this like objective thing, but it really is just like the judiciary, the legislature. It's a part of a political system, and the political end is safety, right? Yeah. And I think sometimes it can be very hard, and I want to ask you about this in a second, but it's hard to like deal with how political decisions can sort of conflict with the truth. right?
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that's hard and also fuels journalists. But I was going to ask you, like, could you just walk us through what happened on November 5th, 1986? Like, what we're pretty sure about, what the prosecution said, what the defense said, and sort of like anything you found any new things you found that might be interesting.
How long do you have? We
I
don't
don't
have
know.
that much time, man. I don't want to die here in 7 weeks not eating anything. But so the basic facts of the case are that Scott Macklem, a 20-year-old student at St. Clair County Community College, also known as SC4, was gunned down in the parking lot at about 8:55 a.m. on November 5th, 1986. The person that was accused of committing this crime was a man named Fred Freeman, who is now known as Temujin Kensu. He changed his name. So I will talk about him chronologically as we have it. So Fred was in Rock at the time of the murder. He's alibied there. His alibi witness at that time.
And that's in northern Michigan, up on the Upper Peninsula.
Yes. So Rock is about 438 miles north of where Port Huron is. He was alibied by a number of people up in that space for the hours surrounding the crime. So he was alibied at about 1:30 in the morning with another person named a woman named Beth Steer. And then at about 2:30 in the morning with a man named Paul DeMars. And then he was alibied at about 8:55 a.m. with Michelle Woodworth, who was his pregnant girlfriend. Now, he was not a guy that,
We're talking like at least 3 a.m. and a 6 hours and change trip.
Correct. And look, I drove that route. That route it's longer than six hours. Like it's a hike. Like it's a real hike, and it's a hike in 2020. When I did it, it was 2024 last year. 2024 car, 2024 speed limits, which are 20 miles an hour faster, or 50 miles an hour faster. Roads better conditions, and all those things. So,
and you also have the challenge of like whoever did this was lying in wait. So
yes,
it's not like they could have just gotten there at 8:55.
Correct. It wasn't just a drive up and shoot thing. There had to be some sort of thing. And also, as Julia and The Consult pointed out, Scott had moved his regular parking situation to a different lot. So you have that scenario as well. There are a number of problems with this case. Like it's inconceivable. Like my show's called. And but yeah, no, I
about the plane theory, right?
Yeah.
I always thought it was a little odd to bring in a theory. People point out, the pilot was the personal pilot of fill in the blank. That I don't find odd. What I find odd about the plane theory is usually in court, you need to have some basis in evidence, right? Like you need to have something that points to this being possible. Yeah. But did you look into the plane theory to see if they're like flight logs or anything?
There are no flight logs. Yeah, there is nothing there. There are no flight logs. I am planning to take a plane. I was going to do a plane up a couple weeks ago, actually, just to see how long it takes to get a plane into the air today, right? Mm-hmm. Which would probably be more efficient than it was in 1986. But that didn't work out because of a mechanical issue, which I'm glad I didn't go up because of that, because otherwise I would not be here today.
Mm.
uh, but yeah, no, there's a like the plane theory was sort of a Hail Mary, I think, from the prosecution, where they realized they could not impeach the witnesses who were there and get the driving theory to make sense, because Temujin is alibied, like I said, 1:30, 2:30, 9 a.m., 11:30 on. All of those are the times of the murder. And the murder took place in Port Huron, which is over 400 miles away. So to drive that route is not possible, period. Like, that is not possible.
And you'd have to, like, even flying, you'd have to go from where you are to a place where a plane is, presumably an airport.
Correct.
And then fly to Port Huron. And I assume that the landing strip is not on a roof in a college, straight in front of them.
The theory was they would have to have landed in a field, which means you would have to have had a car there, which means you have to have a conspirator there. And also, this is before the days of Facebook, or posting where I am all the time. Like, you have to have somebody there that would actually tell you
and wait. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to be at this place at this time, and then them go there. Like, it's even like I've said this to Julia. Like, we focus a lot on the front half of the plane theory, but like, I think the back half is even more intriguing to me, because it just doesn't make sense. Like, if he were to have killed Scott at 8:55 a.m., which is when most of the students, when they're walking to their 9 a.m. class, if he were to have killed him then, drove away right then, I've been there, you can't find a field for 20 minutes, right?
Right.
So let's call it 9:15, you get to a field. And then you got to get out of your car, you got to walk to the plane, you got to do these things. It's 298 miles, I believe, from, Port Huron, again, like with variances based on, flying straight. Yeah. Right.
Yep.
And at that time, I believe the fastest plane was 177 miles an hour. So yeah, you got a couple miles, or you can get there probably in a couple hours. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have to land, you have to get back into a car, you have to drive, and he's alibied again by a number of witnesses at 11:30. It literally would have had to have been
back on the Upper Peninsula.
Correct.
So
yes,
so
back
it
in
would
Escanaba, where he was alibied.
So it would have required flying down, getting back. So like when I listen to what you're saying, I see only one of two ways. You have accomplices on both ends, or
Correct.
Even if the one doesn't know, they're a part of it.
Correct.
The second accomplice probably knows, because somebody needs to drive you out of there.
Yep.
Or
and those where Scott is too.
Right. Yes. Or this is an elaborate, coordinated plan, and you put the car there weeks before, and you did all these things and somehow got back up. And the thing that I find so interesting in listening to the Consult's review of Temujin, because the Consult looks at things from a behavioral perspective, the one thing I walked away with, not sure about much about the man, he is not a planner. He moves on his impulse and instinct.
Correct.
And so, is it plausible, if you're motivated enough, could a person who's not a planner come up with an elaborate plan? Lord knows I'm not a planner and I've done it, but it would have required something unbelievably exceptional.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to look at the other things that are in the behavior too. So the prosecution said that the reason he did this, his motive was he was jealous over, his former paramour being with another man. Well, the one thing we can say about Temujin at that time, Fred at the time, was that he didn't have any problem getting women.
Right.
And so the motive in that is severely diluted.
Did he walk away from the relationship, or did she break up with him?
Well, I'm sure they would both say differently, but from what I was told, he broke up. What I was personally told from him is he broke up with her. Yeah, and he moved away because what I was personally told from him is that he moved away because there was harassment. That's
by people connected to her, kind of thing.
By her individually.
Oh, by her personally.
So, but I am working to try to get to talk to her. I want her side of the story. I want, like, I'm not, a big part of the show is like, I'm not trying to, like segregate the story to one specific storyline, even though it's called the story Inconceivable, the story of Temujin Kensu. It is for me to find out the truth. And as I've told him multiple times, like, if I find out you did this, I'm going to say it. And he said, well, do it, because I didn't do it, And so, like, and I don't think I will, but like, that is my focus, is getting to the truth, because there are a lot of moving pieces in Scott's life that I really, really want to get into. I don't know if I can yet. I'm working to do that, but it is a very, 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 it's very active, is what I can say.
Because victimology is like a super important part of, and it's not meant to blame any victim, but it gives you, I mean, if someone walked in here right now, well, let's say after we're off, and shot me in the head, you would want to know, like, what have I been doing in my life? What kind of relationships do I have? What kind of activities am I involved in? And it's not necessarily to blame me for the guy who walked in here and shot me in the head, but it'll give you some understanding. I was talking about this on a recent episode. Julia and I joke that every year I should send out the FBI questionnaire to all my friends. Yeah. So whenever inevitably someone comes and gets me, they'll have an easier time figuring it. I just said there's going to be a long list of suspects, buddy.
But your point is really, like, apt. Like, yes, like again, Julia and Bob and Susan and Angela talk about this all the time. Like, the victimology is so important, and it's such a like as true crime consumers, which I was before I started doing this part of it. We don't hear about that stuff a lot. Yep. We hear about case, we hear about investigation. We don't understand, like, there was this person, here was our life, and here's why we think there might be another person. And I think that's so important. And
even simply to tell the difference between something like a planned crime and a non-planned crime, or to tell whether the likely suspect knew someone or not. If you go into someone's victimology and they're very, very low risk, then to look for like something random or a stalker or something along those lines. Yeah. And if you go and you see a lot of high risks, you just eliminate those risks. And I think, like, when you talk to, having interviewed a lot of them, people whose loved ones are missing, and this is a huge misconception I have, and I talk about this. I sort of confess this on the True Crime Times Substack podcast episode that's coming out soon. So, when I first heard of Julie Murray, Maura Murray's sister, I had a lot of trepidation, because I was like, I had this feeling that she didn't want anything bad to be said about Maura. Yeah. And then I actually met her and realized she wants to know every bad thing that's true, because she wants anything that will help her find her sister. And so I think, and I've seen that, like, when I talk to Ashley Loring, Heavy Runner's sister, they want to know those things because they know that that's going to be the roadmap to figure it out. And I think one of the sort of like shames I'm getting this vibe from you is that people haven't talked a lot about Scott. Because I was going to ask you about Scott. The only real things I could find when I when I researched was I found a teacher who described him as like just a great kid, happy-go-lucky, always positive, type of thing you would expect to hear. Another teacher said something along the lines of the kind of man or guy you want your daughter to bring home.
Right.
But those are the things I expect in the immediate aftermath of a murder. Although there are times where I've covered murders where people have been arrested, people have been like, I knew he did it. or they're like, everybody in the block wanted to kill him.
Right.
But that is rare. Usually I hear really positive things, but I couldn't find like a good profile or something like that really looked into his life. So what do we know about Scott's life?
I mean, we know very little about Scott's life, unfortunately. What you said is what we found. I FOIA'd his school records. I got denied on that. We know he worked at George Ennis Menswear. We know that he was previously. Yes. And we know that he was approached by a couple of individuals prior to his murder. We don't know who those individuals were.
What do you mean?
He was, there was some kind of conflict there. I can't characterize it off the top of my head, but there's a conflict there between him and two men. And later...
By other people? Other people
correct.
saw it? Yeah.
Yes. And then we move into later where there is conversation that may have been Fred Temujin. There's no evidence to suggest that he was down there at that time. There is only evidence that this was something else. There are a number of things that suggest that Scott was involved in things at the time that may have put him in harm's way, into a place of higher risk, including the drug trade there, and it's on a port. There are many things to suggest that. Those are things I'm looking at right now. I don't feel comfortable saying,
more than
and indicting anything on that, but that's what I feel good about saying.
I was going to ask, were there other things that you saw high risk in his life that,
not necessarily. And I really do want to get his family and Crystal on the podcast to talk about him. And I would like to ask them these questions.
Mm-hmm.
But, there are reports that he and Crystal, had some tumultuousness in their relationship.
Because she was pregnant with this child, right, when he died?
She was. There was, she and he were, planning to get married, reportedly. And, if she's listening, I have no judgment on any of that stuff. I would love to talk to her just to see if she can give me any insight into Scott, because again, in this case, I know very, very little about Scott. I'm trying to find out who he is, and I desperately want to do that.
Do you know if investigators looked into any of those things?
So the investigators looked into a couple of people. They did do some sort of basic canvassing of his friends. There was a report that of a few friends that really none of it amounted to anything in the trial. But yeah, like I have those people's names too, and I'm gonna like reach out to them as well. But yeah, I mean, it by and large, most of the information or most of the like focus went to Fred Freeman. And so just for everybody's like knowledge, so Fred, who Crystal knew as John Lamar because he was using an alias at the time. So Crystal met Fred / John, who's also / Temujin, in about April of 1986. They went out a few times. You know, they did what they did. But previous to that, she had a relationship with Scott. And then after that, she had a relationship with a guy named Arnell Hope. Arnell, at the time of the murder, was on a ship. I can't remember, Merchant Marine or something like that. So I have so many case files in my head. I can't remember exactly. But so Arnell is gone. He is totally alibied away from everything. So they go back toward Temujin. Again, Temujin is 438 miles away. And then he is more or less, he's honed in on because he has, for the time, it was an alternative lifestyle. He was a rock and roll guy, you know, focused on martial arts and all those things. So,
yeah, the guy who sort of like the Damian Nichols of their town.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I mean. There are so many like parallels to West Memphis 3.
West Memphis 3.
Yeah.
I think we're going to stop there for now and return in a few days. In the meantime, if you want to find out more about the case, I recommend you check out the episodes that Julia Cowley, Bob Drew, Angela Surser, and Susan Kostler Drew did on their podcast, The Consult. Julia, Bob, Angela, and Susan are retired FBI profilers, and they provide an interesting and honest look at the behaviors and the evidence in the case. I would also recommend the Prosecutors podcast episodes on the case. And Truth and Justice with Bob Ruff also did episodes on the case. There's a lot out there, and it's worth a listen for different perspectives. In the next episode, we're going to explore what we know about Scott Macklem, the victim, why Temujin has not been released, some of the behaviors prior to his arrest, including alleged sexual assaults and emotional abuse that came up at his trial and commutation hearings. We will also discuss how Temujin's strategy thus far has failed and some of the potential reasons it hasn't worked. In the meantime, if you would like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For those of you interested in true crime, you can check out our new publication, The True Crime Times, on Substack. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, and to support the podcast, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. We'll see you guys all again soon.